Hilchas Hanheden v'Einshin HaMesurim Lem Perik Shnayim v'Esrim. Shnayim shebo lefanecha ledin. Two people are coming for a din Torah. Echad rach, one is a soft person, ve'echad kosher, the other one's a tough person. And you're afraid that if the tough person is going to lose, so you're going to have a lot of damage from it. He's going to cause you a lot of pain and damage. And the question is, so you want to avoid this din Torah. Now, vice versa, if they're both kosher, so then there's no concern, because lepel either one, since they're both kosher, so the one that you're going to be mezaka will protect you from the one that you'll be mechayiv. So then you don't have that much. You don't have an excuse to be mishtamit from this din Torah if they're both kosher. But the problem is if one is a rach, that's what it says in the Sma. Masha'inkin, if one is a rach and one is a kosher, so if the kosher is going to lose and the rach is not going to be able to protect you from the wrath of the kosher, so Mamela, you're afraid that you're going to be suffering at the hands of the kosher if he loses the din Torah, and therefore you want to avoid this din Torah. Nachamo. Shnayim shebo lefanecha ledin, echad rach ve'echad kosher, is actually tishmas devreim, before you heard their tainus, or even oy mishatishmas devreim, even if you already heard their tainus. You don't really have a tzad, who's right and who's wrong. Is atar ashoy leimalahem eini niskak lechem. I don't want to get involved in this din Torah. So you could hold yourself back. In other words, before the din Torah, you for sure could hold yourself back. And even if they started tining, but if you don't really have a tzad of who is right and who's wrong, you could also be mishtamet from the din Torah. You realize the one is a rach and one is a kosher. Because Shemi is chayiv a you're afraid maybe the person that's a chazak will become chayiv. He'll run after the dain. Aval mishatishma is devreim. Once you heard their tainus, and you already know where the din is going towards, at that point in time, you're already involved in din Torah, and you already have a tzad who's right and who's wrong. So then you don't have a right to say Ein Niskak Lechem. Shenamar lei sagurim mipnei yish. That's where the pasuk lei sagurim mipnei yish applies. Since you already have you're like, so to speak, a dain in this din Torah, and you already have an atiyah. So then it's lei sagurim mipnei yish. Sholitemer ish plei nirashu. Shema yarig is b'ni. Shema yadlik is godishi. Shema yikatzis nuteisei. So then you should. But since Lupel, you already got involved in this din Torah, and you already have an atiyah in the din Torah, so the din is le'sagurim mipnei yish. Now this din that before you got involved, you could avoid the din Torah, you could be mishtabit from the din Torah, is only if you're not a memun or a rab. You start a person and they want to come to a din Torah, and you're saying you don't want to get involved in this din Torah. However, if a person was a memun or a rabbim, so then he's bechlal is chayiv lizok. When two people come to a din Torah, and one is a rach and one is a kosher, and this person is a memun or a rabbim, he's a set dayan for this place, so then he could not be mishtabah for din Torah even before he got involved. This whole din that he could be mishtabah for din Torah is only when he's not a memun or a rabbim. And even if he's not a memun or a rabbim, once he started hearing the din Torah, and lepel, he has already a tzad, le'echa din Torah, he also can be mishtabah. But if he was a memun l'rabbi, he came a mishtan taro. Halacha beis. V'chein talmid shoyeshiv l'fnei rabbi v'roas chus la'oni v'cheva la'osher. So he was quiet. He didn't feel comfortable like going against the osher. Is areze oiver mishum l'sagur mipnei yish. And also v'al midvar sheket tirchok. That goes in together, even though he didn't say anything wrong. But he's a yeshiv l'fnei rabbi. Mele, he's supposed to be the person that's supposed to be me'ir, whether or not there's something to be me'ir, and he has something to be me'ir, and he wasn't me'ir, so that's sheker. The sheker is that he's not being me'ir, which seems to be like implying that he has nothing to say. He shouldn't have a Talmud bur, he should have someone that's a Talmud which is a Talmud which he could converse with, and Memela come to a clarity in the din. Because again, by having a Talmud bur lefanov, either he won't have what to say, Memela he won't help him in clarifying the din, or even if he will have what to say, it could be fadreit. Memela is because he's a Talmud bur, so therefore, the purpose is that the person is supposed to want to go Elohemus. So having a Talmud which is not a Talmud bur will help the dayan eventually come to the emes. Minayin halacha gimel minayin letalmud shireyas rabbi shator bedin shaliyemar. He shouldn't say amtulei achiyigmar adin. Let me wait until he finishes the din, which is really based on a false assumption l'chatchila. And ve'esterenu then ve'avnenu mishali kidei sheyikare adin al shmi. So in other words, he wants that that the din should be nikra al shmi, so he's going to let his Rav continue based on a mistake. And then he's going to go ahead and prove that the whole binyan was based on a mistake. And then he's going to build it himself. So again, Talmud Leimer Dvar Sheker Tirchak. That's being misnaig be'efel shel sheker. Dvar Sheker Tirchak is not only when a person says a lie. Dvar Sheker Tirchak means he's acting in a way of sheker. He's pretending that he has nothing to say. He does have what to say, but he's pretending he has nothing to say. And the reason why he's pretending he has nothing to say is because he's waiting to say it later and be able to show how smart he is. So that goes also together with Dvar Sheker Tirchak. Halacha Dalet. Mitzvah loimer lebalidina betchila b'dina atem reitzim eib pshara. To give them a choice. Do you want to sit by a din Torah and we should have shuras hadin, or you're willing to have a pshara, some type of a compromise? Imrotzu b'pshara. If they're willing, both of them, to have a pshara, is oisen b'nei pshara. So you make a pshara between them. Whereas you don't hear them out, you hear them out, but on the other end you make a pshara between them. You don't go to the din Torah to yikav adin esahor. V'chol bezin she'oisa pshara tamid, a bezin that normally makes a pshara, that always makes a pshara, is areza mishubach v'olav nemar mishpat shalom shifta b'sharechem. What does it mean, mishpat shalom? Ezu mishpat she'eshim mishalom. That's havei ameir mizeh bitzua. That means bitzua, when they work things out together and they make a compromise with each other. V'chein b'David u'emer v'yidavid eisa mishpat u'tzedakah. There's again ezu mishpat she'eshim tzedakah. That means making a pshara. So David would be making psharas between people. People had arguments between each other. So if they're going to come to din Torah, and each one's going to come to din Torah, so there's a certain din Torah. And if you don't have a clear raya, so mele you can be mitzvah. Masha'enkin, if there's starker rayas, and mele both of them, in other words, you can make some type of a pshara between them, so that's preferable. Now, Bamed Dvarim Amurim, that you could go ahead and suggest that there should be a pshara, that's Kedem Gmar Din. Before there was a Gmar Din, that the Bezdin paskin. Afal Pi Sheshama Divrayim, the Bezdin already heard their tainis, V'yada Lehechan Adin Noita, and they know where the din should be noita. In other words, if they're going to paskin, they're going to know who's going to be chayev and who's going to be zakai. Nevertheless, mitzvah leftzeiah, even though they know in their minds that to which side is going to be the psak din, but on the other end, it's preferable that the two parties, the two bali dinim, should agree to some type of a pshara, even though the dayanim know lehechan adineta. Aval achash gomar adin. After the dayan already goes gomar adin va'omar ish pleni atachayev ish pleni atazaka ain't rashoy last pshara b'nei. The dayan that he said, this one is chayev, this one is zaka, and the person that's chayiv is very upset. Mela now the dayan is coming along and saying, let's make a pshara. There's the din is that you're chayiv and he's zakai. But on the other end, now that he's so upset or whatever, let's make a pshara. So that's not allowed to. The din should make a hole through the har. In other words, regardless of how upset the other person is going to be, that's not a time to make a pshara. I mean, if the other person wants to make a pshara, he has a right. But for the dayanim to suggest pshara after the balidinim, after the mardin, has no place. Halacha hey. Afal pi shirotzu baliyadin b'pshara, even though the balidinim agreed to a pshara b'bezin, but nevertheless, yeshlem lachzer v'letvei adin at sheyiknem yad shneim. Whereas until they make a ma'aseh kinyan that they're willing to go for a pshara between them, so only then do we go for pshara. In other words, the bezin makes a pshara between them. That's the yiknu. They make a kinyan that there's going to be a pshara. There's going to be something about a compromise. Masha'enkin, in other words, the compromise is not only done between them. The compromise is done that Bezdin goes ahead and makes a pshara between them. That's the pshara. Pshara is that the Bezdin makes a pshara between them, rather than going yikav hadin esahor. So aval b'shirotzu balei hadin b'pshara, they were willing to go b'pshara, but they could change their mind and say, no, we want to go to a din Torah, unless they made a kinyan that they're going to go b'pshara. Halacha vav. Yafe keach ha'pshara mikeach hadin. There's a mile pshara legabi din. Sheshnei adyetzes shudonu. Two adyetzes go ahead and paskin the din Torah in the name din. And always v'yeshul badin la'avzer b'em. The badin could say, listen, your din is not a din because you're a hedyet. However, v'mosu pshara, if they made a pshara of economy yodim, there was a ma'aseh kinyan that they're willing to agree to a pshara, and these adyetzes made a pshara between the two balidinim. So then in yichel la'avzer b'em, that they can't be la'avzer b'em because l'pil, since they made a ma'aseh kinyan, the ma'aseh kinyan is binding, and therefore the pshara that these adyetis made is also binding. Halacha Zayin. Osir le'echad min hadayonim k'sheyetzi mibezin, leimar ani hu ha'mezaka oy ha'mechayev, v'chaverei chelken olai, u'mo ese v'heim rabu olai. So in other words, there's a dintera, and there's dayonim, there's, let's say, 3 dayonim, and 2 of them held one way, and the other one held the other way. So this dayan can't come along and say, listen, I held this way, but the other dayanim held differently. And Memela, the Sof Kol Sof, the Psak Din was like the other dayanim, not the way I originally held. The Omar, if he does say that, if he comes out of a dintera and he goes in his megala, that he really, there was a certain Psak Din of the dintera, but he's saying he wasn't part of the Roiv, which was Machriya that Psak Din. He was the argument. He argued with them, but Lepel, they were Machriya against him because they were the Reiv. So that goes to Hareu Bechlal Heilech Rachel Megala Seit. He's been Megala Seit of what happened in Bezdin. It's not allowed to. Maise b'Talmud Echad shehetzi dvarim shenemar beis hamedrash la'achar shtayim v'esrim shana. He said over what happened 22 years ago. Ve'itziyu Bezdin hamedrash ve'chrizu olav zeh Megala Seit. So in other words, this is something which is forbidden for a dayan to go out and say that what was going on behind closed doors in Bezdin. In other words, the Bezdin behind closed doors were deliberating, and 2 of them held one way and the other one held this way. And Lepel, the Bezdin paskin b'shem the entire Bezdin, the way the Reiv said that, which is the din achir Rab Lahatis. And now this Yochid, which didn't hold like the Reiv, which he had to agree to the Reiv, but he originally didn't hold like the Reiv, is being Megala that he wasn't holding like the Reiv. That goes into together of Hoylech Rachel Megala Seit. Halacha Ches. Shol echad mi baledinim lichtiv le psak din is kesem lekach bo pleini lebezin shel pleini and pleini baldine shetani bekach and v'yotze zake yechayev and v'nesen le. And they mentioned just the bezin ve'in maskidin shem ha'mezakim v'leisham ha'mechayeven ela beis dina shel pleini midivreim this complaining. There's this and this bezin. He says who the bezin are, who the bezin are. And then he says, from the Bezdin, he was in the Zakkai. It wasn't the Gei. Who in the Bezdin held Zakkai, who in the Bezdin held Chayev. The Gei is that once the Bezdin came out with the Psak Zakkai, so that Psak is B'Shem the entire Bezdin. Kachoyim in Hogim Shalanchi Yerushalayim. Machnisim Balidinim, V'Shemim Divrei V'Tanisei. And then Machnisim Eidim, V'Shemim Divrei. And then Mitziin Kolodim L'chutz. And v'noisen adayonim, v'noisen b'neim, v'dover, v'gemes hadover. So in other words, the Eidim and not the Balidinim saw the arguments between the dayonim. They had no idea which dayan held which way. V'achar kach, and after the dayonim amongst themselves, in front of nobody else, discussed the union between themselves, then machnisim Balidinim, and v'godl sheb'dayonim, eimer ish pleni atazakai, ish pleni atachayev. And the purpose of it was since the whole deliberation was shalei b'fnei ha'balidinim, so the balidinim didn't really see who is being leitel l'chiv and who's being leitel l'schus. Halacha Yud, dayan sheyodeh b'chaveri shu gazlan a rosha is also l'starif. You're now allowed to be mitzarif to become part of a bezdin that you know part of that bezdin is someone that's a gazlan a rosha shenemar midvar sheket tirchuk. That's also part of midvar sheket tirchuk. Because Lepel, a dayan, which is a Russia, doesn't really have a din of a dayan. So if you're coming and becoming part of that bezdin, so you're part of a lie. The lie is that this is a bezdin which is passing. They're not really a bezdin that's passing, because this bezdin is not a real bezdin. The kacho yibiki adash b'shalayim eisen and yeshum bedin at sheyedu mish yeshum. They wouldn't sit down to a dintera because they knew who they're sitting with, who the other dayanim are. They would never sign on a star at sheyedu mi choisim imoim. Who's signing with them? They even wouldn't go into a suda. Who they're sitting with. In other words, they would only associate with people that were good people and honest people. They didn't want to associate with Rishoyim. So they certainly didn't want to become Dayanim with Rishoyim, and they didn't want to become Eidim with people that aren't Kosher Eidos. And even B'negei Suda, that was the Chiddush, that even B'negei Suda, they ain't said them Ella Achiyedu Mi Meisiv Imoim.